Hi there. Today we're here to talk about the evolution of talent intelligence. I am Bill Pelster, the co-founder of the Josh Bersin Company, and I'm here with the founder, Josh Bersin himself, the man who needs no introduction. And today we're going to be talking about how talent intelligence continues to evolve, and we're just going to have a conversation on kind of the arc of the story here. So Josh, as we've thought about talent intelligence, there's actually another story that's playing out that kind of frames everything. And you've talked about it as post-industrial. Can you give us a little bit around post-industrial and why it's so important to this topic?
Sure. I mean, the real backdrop to all of this technology and AI that we're using in companies is the labor market, and the fact that over the last really decade, and maybe accelerating even faster now, we have a very, very competitive, difficult labor market for employers. You know, children are growing up in families that are delaying getting married. There are fewer children being born. People are living longer. They're postponing their childbearing years, or maybe not having children at all. And so the size of the labor market is about to peak in a lot of countries like Japan and Germany. It's already peaked and it's starting to shrink. So we have this challenge that to grow a company or grow a business, you can't just say hire, hire, hire anymore. And the second, of course, is this accelerated transformation going on in the business climate. 60% of CEOs this year told PwC that they believe that the company they lead now will not exist in 10 years. That was up from about 45 or 46% last year. So the number of CEOs saying that is going up. And they're essentially saying, my job as a CEO is not just to execute, it's to transform. So I need to move faster and faster and faster towards this new business model or go-to-market model that I'm working on, which means I need to take the people in the company and I need to bring them into a new area of jobs, new roles, new skills. And by the way, skills are changing so fast that we don't even know what skills we don't have, because new technologies and new business models and new professional domains are being created so quickly. So these things come together in a world where most of the HR practices and organizational design practices that we use are rooted in the industrial age. And in the industrial age, it was very different. In the industrial age, we created jobs and managers. In other words, we had sort of managers and labor to build business models that developed products and services at scale. And so the way companies made money in the auto industry and the oil industry and most of the industrial companies was, let's do things faster and faster at increasing lower cost to drive revenue margin and market share. Now the differentiation of most companies is how quickly can you move to this new space, how innovative can you be, and what kind of service can you provide to your customers or shareholders. In the case of services, by the way, 70% of the jobs in the United States now are service delivery jobs. That used to be 40% 20 years ago. So this post-industrial age is one where we are very dependent on our people. We're very dependent on the skills of our people. There are fewer people to hire. We have to focus on productivity and continuous organizational redesign. And essentially, the CHRO is being elevated to be one of the most important roles in the company. So all of those things coming together are creating the demand for what we now call talent intelligence.
Yeah, and maybe just a few more data points here just to kind of tie it together. In the industrial model, we had basically more people out there. We had a surplus of labor relative to the number of jobs. So there were a lot of historical HR practices built around the fact that, you know, a human being is just a widget. We can pull them out and we can put a new one in. And every technology for the last 20 years around human capital was built with the job as the center. In a post-industrial world, that changes, right? It's about the work and the skills.
Right.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the fundamental architecturally significant change is that every piece of HR software, every HR practice was designed around the idea of a job in a hierarchy with a title, with a level, with a set of competencies. And the human being was, as you said, the replaceable part. So are you capable of this job or not? If you're not, we're going to give you another job. If you are, what is your next potential job you can have? Well, these days that is essentially recipe for disaster, because those jobs, those structural jobs are changing so fast. We need to design the company around people. So instead of a job-centric architecture, we have a people-centric architecture. Now we're asking questions like, what are the skills of this person? What are the potential skills of this person? What are the aspirations of this person? How do we keep this person because we've invested in this person, because we can't swap them out because maybe there's nobody to replace them. And then in the outside job market, when we're looking for someone, we don't just want someone who's had this job before. We need to know what their capabilities and skills and experiences are. We need to know much more about them because we're not slotting them into a fixed position. Bill, I think almost everything in HR I've ever studied, from succession management, performance management, pay, I mean, all of these things have to be reconsidered in this new world.
Yeah, no, it's kind of changing the entire recipe, and that's what I wanted just to anchor on there, right? So it doesn't mean that ERP goes away, right? But if we think about the technology stack, there is a new layer of technology that's coming in. And one piece of the technology is understanding the work that needs to get done in the organization. Another piece is what are the skills and capabilities we have, and then how do we bring them together in some sort of talent marketplace? Can you say a little bit about the kind of evolving technology stack?
Yeah, so unfortunately for those of us in HR, we're stuck with the technology that we can buy. We can't build it ourselves. And 99% of the tools today, maybe 98, were designed around this industrial architecture. Job titles, job levels, capability or competency models attached to the job, pay structures in bands assigned to the jobs based on the level of the job. I mean, all of these ideas have been built into the software that we use. So if you go to your ERP, HCM system, whatever it is, and you say, we want to build a new team, and they're going to work on a whole bunch of new things that we don't have job titles for. We need to know their capabilities and skills and how there's nothing in the software to help you do that. Nothing. There's no way. They don't even have a concept of that. And to make it even a little bit worse, most of the HCM systems have been sort of built like ERPs. They were designed along this idea that we're going to hire somebody out of college, we're going to promote them up, and there's going to be like a supply chain of them. We used to call it pre-hire to retire. And so all of the talent management technologies that you buy, even if you buy an independent talent management tool, were designed around this sort of linear progression through the company. Well, that doesn't work either, because people leave and then they come back and they take a year off and then they want to do job sharing and then they want to take Fridays off and then we want to have a 4-day week and then we want to have a team and everybody has multiple projects and they don't only have one job. And by the way, everybody is kind of a leader of something. We don't have leaders and non-leaders. We have kind of everybody leading different things. So these traditional technologies are holding companies back, and that's the reason why talent intelligence today looks like sort of a nirvana that's sort of laying on top of these traditional systems, which I eventually think it's going to replace them, honestly.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's interesting, and this kind of brings us to skills, right? So when you look at the human being from a skills perspective, and not the historical, what industry did I grow up in and what are my job titles? When you look at them from industry and job titles, it's fairly constricting. And historically, people have stayed within their industry. But the minute you look at a person from the skills perspective, you can go horizontal across many industries. And you've commented on that
right.
around the number of people changing jobs.
It's really interesting. I got out of college in '78, and most of my friends went to work in an industry and stayed in that industry for their career. That was the way it used to work, because the job levels and the experiences you had, compounded your value in that industry. Well, once you start thinking of individuals as, buckets of skills in a sense, I hate to use that word, but that's the idea. Why don't I if I can take these skills that I learned in a bank and use them in a retail company, great, why not? It's more fun for me, I get to do something new. The retail company can learn some things that I learned at the bank, and the bank can hire somebody else who has maybe more analytic skills than the people in the bank had. So during the last 2 or 3 years, we now have, if you look at the mobility data in the BLS, 45, 46, 47% of the jobs going on are across industries. That is just radically different than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that's just another indication of this people-centric business environment that we're in.
Yeah, and so skills is really emerging in this post-industrial world as kind of a key currency to really look at people. So let's talk about talent intelligence. I remember nearly 4 years ago now, you walked on stage at HR Tech and you said there is a new category of technology out there, and it actually has become a standard for the industry. Do you want to talk about kind of version 1 of talent intelligence?
You know, I don't invent these things. I just pick up a lot of signals and try to make sense. So a good 7 or 8 years ago, I started to talk to vendors like Eightfold and others that were basically amassing a large amount of people data and running AI initially for sourcing and recruiting, because one of the existential challenges you have when you become more flexible as an organization like this is, how do we know who to hire? And who do we hire? Because we can't hire people that have done this before, because we're doing something we've never done before. So what they were doing is they were essentially like Google. They were taking lots and lots and lots of data about people, and then they were running AI models. They were probably called machine learning models at the time, to try to figure out, could we infer or guess, in a sense, what this person's skills were, their constellation of skills relative to this person, who's likely to be good at this kind of job, where have they worked before, who have they worked with, what technologies have they worked on in those jobs. All that data is kind of out there. It's not in your HCM system at all, and it may not be on their LinkedIn profile either. So they were building these models, and they were building them for recruiting. And as I started to talk to the customers that were using them, I would hear things like, wow, we have found candidates that we would never, ever have found before. We're having a much more diverse and inclusive recruiting experience now, because we're not looking for people that look like the people in our company. Our ability to find internal candidates has skyrocketed, because now we really know these AI-driven profiles of these roles, and we can apply the same technology inside the company, and we can enrich the data from the vendor with our own data. And we can say, great, Mr. Vendor, you have all this talent intelligence data about these people. We know their performance ratings. We know their bosses. So if we stick that stuff in there, now we're seeing better and better and better. And that market was not defined. There was no definition. So I just kind of came up with the idea that let's call it talent intelligence. I couldn't think of another word for it, and it sort of stuck.
Yeah, no, and Eightfold was that category leader when we were thinking about it. Complete side note, kind of funny. You went out on stage and said talent intelligence is a new category, and then I think the following week you went out and looked at LinkedIn profiles for the number of people that claim to be talent intelligence experts.
Well,
what happened?
So the funny thing about it is, I'm not sure I'm the one who first came up with the word, but there are more than 2,000, today, 2024, there are more than 2,000 people in LinkedIn with jobs that have talent intelligence in the title. Now, a good 3/4 or maybe 80% of them are sourcers. They're doing recruiting stuff, but a lot of them are doing things like workforce planning, skills planning, location planning. Like, one of the things that talent intelligence will tell you is, don't go fish in that pond for people with those skills, because they're not there. They're here. Well, a lot of recruiting technologies don't know that. So you're doing job ads and placing, sending recruiters out there looking for people. So they're doing a location analysis. They're doing competitive analysis of skills, because one of the things a talent intelligence platform can do is it can show you the skills in your company, and it can show you the trending skills in your industry, and even show you the skills of your competitor, which we do in our GWI studies. So you can suddenly say to yourself, wow, no wonder we're falling behind in this particular area. Look at what these other guys are doing. We don't even have anybody who knows how to do that stuff. So there is a job class of talent intelligence gurus that is being created that's really, really an important new area of business in HR.
Yeah, and by the way, GWI is our global workforce intelligence. It's our industry verticals.
Right.
When we look at banking or pharma or healthcare and understand the skills and what's really going on there. It's interesting, in kind of talent intelligence 1.0, it was really about a bunch of point solutions. Can you talk about some of the point solutions that were being driven back then?
Sure. So the vendors that started this, 90% of them started in recruiting.
Yep.
And that is a big market, lots of money spent on it. It's easy to cost justify a new system if it gets you better people. So it became a pretty good sized business. It's probably $500, $600 million business now of talent intelligence tools. By the way, for some reason, the word talent intelligence has now been slapped onto every recruiting tool on the planet. So please, those of you who are watching this, be careful, what the name it might imply. But anyway, it started in recruiting, and as soon as the more sophisticated vendors like Eightfold had big companies using these recruiting tools, the internal people said, wow, I know we need to do recruiting, but we're also doing a redesign or an org change, or we did an M&A. We can use this to assess the skills and capabilities of the people in the company. So we can use this for org redesign and org analysis. Oh, and by the way, look, there's 5 jobs in the company at different levels with different titles, reporting to different people that have exactly the same skills. Maybe we ought to get those things together, maybe come up with some common names and titles for those jobs, and get those people to talk to each other so they can share best practices and we can decide what they need to do to improve the roles they're in. Maybe we want to centralize those people, maybe not, but we never even knew this before. Now companies are saying, we need to build a more rich leadership pipeline. In fact, everybody's kind of concerned about their leadership pipeline. We have people in the hypo pool, but that's a tiny number of people. And Barry, that's a very, kind of biased process anyway. Look at this data we have about who's performing the fastest, who's developing the best skills, who are the domain experts. I think some of those people are our future leaders, so Heidrick is working on that kind of solution. It's being used for learning and development, where people say, you know what, you keep telling me to take all these courses. To what end? Why am I taking all these courses? I want to move from this job to that job. I want to consume content that helps me move to this level of my career. Tell me what I need. So now we're getting automatic career pathing, automatic skills adjacencies, which allow people to find content or mentors or coaches to help them move to the next role that they want. And then the company can say, by the way, we need a whole bunch of people over here. We don't need so many people here. Let's show these guys the adjacent skills they need to move over here instead of firing them and hiring more people over here. So there's and then there's another one, which is pay. So believe it or not, most companies have massive pay inequities driven by the fact that, you get a raise when you get a good performance rating. So as soon as you get that raise, you're a little bit higher than your peer. And if that performance rating was slightly biased, you take that raise with you for year after year after year, and now you have all these inconsistencies in pay. And you take a snapshot of all that and you say, why is this person making this much money and this person making this much money when this person has skills that this person doesn't have? There's just a lot of applications for this.
And as we've been thinking about it, basically 4 years later now, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of conversations. It's a very crowded space. A lot of people claim to have talent intelligence. But you've been talking internally, and I think this is really the first time we're talking about it more publicly. You're talking about enterprise talent intelligence. What's going on in your mind around enterprise talent intelligence?
Well, we have a big white paper coming out on this, Bill, you know that, and a lot of you will get a chance to read it. So if you think about most of the technologies we buy in companies, they're mostly started for single-use applications. There's something that this software does that is really valuable, and we need it, and it has a high ROI, so we're going to do it. And we buy one of those, and then we buy another one of those, and we buy another one of those, and then we say to ourselves, the data coming out of each one of these systems is sort of similar, but they're not combined. So how do we connect them together? So in the case of talent intelligence, the root sort of type of data is skills data. But there's more than that, but it's usually called skills data. So what we would really like to do, and most companies know this, is we'd like to have one system of record, quote unquote, which is not really static, it's really changing all the time, for the skills and capabilities of people in the company. So if I want to do a pay analysis, and somebody else is doing org design, and somebody else is doing recruiting, and somebody else is doing career management, we don't have 5 different taxonomies, 5 different sources of data, all inconsistent with each other. How do we make that all work together? And I've got data in my company that's exclusive to me that I'd like to match up against this stuff, and I don't really want to do it 5 times in 5 different systems. So I want an enterprise essentially version of this stuff. And so I think there's a natural progression of this market from these individual point data-centric solutions to one for the enterprise. And I think Eightfold is well along on that path. I think the big ERPs, Oracle, SAP, Workday, are not there yet by any means. I'm not sure if they can get there. And I think most big companies are telling us, and they're issuing RFPs, and they're saying, look, we like all of these magnificent tools. How do we get them all to work together? And that is what this enterprise intelligence is going to be about.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because organizations that are not understanding, one, the post-industrial and this shift towards skills, and by the way, we're living through this shift, and sometimes when you're living through it, it's hard to see it. Just one quick example. You know, I came back from India last week, and I was doing a session with probably 60 talent acquisition recruiters across Asia. And the thing that startled them the most when I talked about skills and Eightfold, they were so used to competing within their vertical for talent. And I said, you are now competing against every recruiter in every industry because through skills, they can look at you. And that's kind of the bigger story. Organizations that are understanding how to use skills data are starting to get a competitive advantage in the marketplace because they can think about work and the ability to execute that work differently. Who's doing that well? You know, we don't have to name companies,
well,
but...
I'll name two companies. I mean, first of all, the company that a lot of people maybe don't understand is Meta. Yep. So, you know, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, WhatsApp, all the things they do, they are a very shrewd company. Now, you think about the innovation they've done in the metaverse, the innovation they did with the Ray-Ban glasses, which is basically disrupting Apple, what they've done with Instagram and everything else. They actually have an enormous amount of talent intelligence in that company, and they have a big team of people that's looking for detailed skills in different domains to snatch people away from other companies to get them over there. And you know, their stock, you know, you can see their performance. Another example of a company that's done this very well is Chevron. And I won't give you the details, but you know, Chevron is a very, very well-run, old energy company. They have enormously high tenure. They take very, very good care of their people. And they know doggone well that the carbon-based economy is shifting. It's not going away, but there's a new economy based on batteries and solar and other forms of energy. And so they're looking for engineering expertise to help them map out their strategy in that area. And those jobs don't have titles. They're not sitting around in other oil companies to recruit from, like drilling engineers. So they're using it to build skills in that area. Third example is the pharma companies, Bayer. Bayer, who, by the way, just recently flattened their organization and decided they're going to go post-industrial as an org model, has been using tools like Eightfold to find scientists in biological science to help with agricultural chemicals and other pharmaceuticals that don't necessarily have job titles that have anything to do with pharmaceuticals or agricultural chemicals at all. So I mean, I think you could go to virtually every industry and you could find use cases of this where you can, you know, really use the talent intelligence to make your company a lot better off. One more example. You know, we did this big example of the consumer banking industry, and it was really shocking. So there's a lot of consumer banks, and the ones that are high performers, of course, some of them are just bigger, but they have much more advanced mobile apps, technology, cybersecurity systems, user interfaces, right, that just make them much, much easier to do business with and much more dynamic as a business model. Well, when you look at the tech skills in these high-performing banks versus the traditional banks, it's almost like two different industries. These guys are doing stuff that these guys don't even know how to do. I mean, they may not even know what the words are. So, you know, if I were running a bank in a medium-sized bank and really wanted to aspire to be like a JP Morgan or something, I would be studying that and I would be figuring out how come we're not using this kind of technology and these kinds of skills. I wouldn't just go out there and treat recruiting engineers the way I currently am. So I think it touches every single industry, and even in consumer goods, where we found that the high-performing consumer goods companies have unique skills in consumer intelligence and consumer understanding that their peers don't have. So, you know, it's not just hard skills, it's everything.
Yeah, and we actually use Eightfold data to analyze, going back to those the global workforce intelligence, and we found a pattern in every industry and using the Eightfold data, and we actually wrote a report called the Pace Setters.
Right.
Do you just want to maybe a word on the Pace Setters?
Yeah, so we did this really wonderful thing. We're still doing it with Eightfold and some other providers to look at these trending skills by industry to try to help you guys get a sense of, in your industry, what are the things to watch out for, to be aware of is really important. And what we found was that, first of all, it's pretty easy to see what these trending skills are, and it's also becomes pretty obvious that there's a lot of companies that are behind, and there's some companies that are ahead. Well, the ones that are ahead, which we kind of figured out using the data, are extremely high-performing companies financially and through their innovative and go-to-market. So the pace setters are companies that we've identified that have these evolved, advanced, more sophisticated, maybe is the word, skills. But they're not all technical skills, by the way. One of the things that pace setters are really good at, which is sort of odd, is change.
Yep.
They have change specialists, they have workshop facilitators, they have HR people that specialize in change, they have change leaders. Sounds weird, that's been around for a long, long time, but that's actually a critical skill that a lot of companies don't have. And if you don't have change enablement skills in the company, of course, what you do is you kind of don't change, and you hire a consulting firm, and they kind of try to help you change, but you don't change enough. So that's an example of a totally unobvious skill set that came up very, very high.
And the pace setters were actually kind of the beginning of the inspiration around the enterprise approach to talent intelligence, because they just think differently beyond a point solution. Let me just pivot a little bit. So we've been talking about skills, we've been talking about the evolution of talent intelligence, now to enterprise talent intelligence. There were a few things that come up in so many conversations over and over again. Number one, from a skills perspective. In a world where we're looking at skills, do degrees and other traditional qualifications or job titles mean as much? And kind of what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, ideally we would ignore those things, but they are really invaluable. They're signals.
Yep.
So, if you have a master's degree, like I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering, I don't know what that tells you about my expertise in HR, nothing. So you look at somebody's degree and you have a guess, if you're a recruiter, that, they're probably pretty smart. They probably know how to write. They probably know math, right? You get some fundamental stuff. So I don't think degrees are going away. But if you look at the relative importance of degrees in hiring, it's going down, 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 down. I mean, it isn't going to zero. It's still significant. And people with degrees statistically do make more money than people without degrees because there's lots of jobs that do require them. But this is going to make it easier for you as a recruiter or an employer to say, look, there's not enough people. We can't only look at people who went to these schools. We've got to broaden our aperture. Now you have the technology and the data to do that. So I think it's going to accelerate that. By the way, I hope it also encourages these universities to feel a little more accountability for the skills that they're giving people.
It is funny because your background is engineering and mine is computer science, and we both ended up in HR. Who would have thought that? Yeah. Other than maybe Eightfold would have spotted that through all the skills capability. The other couple of comments that come up quite a bit is, what about the regulatory environment? How should we think about this? Like, am I on safe ground? Is it a get out of jail free card? Do I have to be careful with skills? How should I be thinking about skills?
Yeah, so there's a law in New York, there's a law in Illinois, there's the AI Act in the EU, and essentially what these laws are doing is they're forcing employers to, number one, comply with regulation regardless of the technology you use. So if you're hiring all white males for a position and you get sued by an African American female and you can't justify that hiring, you can't blame the software. You're liable. So there's this basic EEOC types of laws you have to comply with. But I think what's coming is very similar to GDPR, where what the EU did in GDPR is they basically said, for data privacy and security, you have to define a governance process. You don't have to, GDPR doesn't tell you you have to do it well, it just says you have to do it. And they will inspect you if you get into trouble. And you have to have a governance process for data management, you have to have a governance process for privacy, and there's certain rules of what you can and cannot share and what data you can collect. The same thing's happening in AI. If you're going to buy or take a platform and add to it and build a talent intelligence system, you're going to have to watch over it. You, as a buyer of that system, have to take responsibility for the bias or lack of bias in the data and you have to manage it. So if you take a product like Eightfold or whatever one you use, and you throw all of your leadership data in there, and every one of your leaders is a white male that went to Harvard, you may have biased the system, and you need to be aware of that, and you need to get some help to make sure that you're not messing it up on your own behalf by accident. So that's where these laws are taking place. By the way, the IT departments are probably going to be actively involved in this because a lot of these regulations are sort of IT data management things. So I think this is going to be an area of concern, but I don't think it's going to slow down the progress at all. I mean, the upside and the ROI of this is so high that we'll build the regulatory compliance muscle as we go.
It's interesting because we have a great relationship, and so does Eightfold, with Keith Sunderling, EEOC commissioner, who's had the loudest voice on this. And I would have to say Eightfold has been early in thinking about the governance and the ethics of how you use this. But his advice is very simple, and it parallels exactly what you just said. Large companies today, for their manual processes, have internal reviews around disparate outcomes. They look at promotions, they look at pay, they look at hiring, they look at leadership succession, and they run it through internal processes. What Keith says over and over again is make sure you still do those processes in a world of AI and skills. Right. If you do that, you're on solid ground. If you just blindly turn to the machine, you're on less solid ground. One of the other things that comes up, since we're talking about AI, you have put out many articles about the companies using the AI as a feature on an old technology versus companies that are AI native first, vector database. Why is that important?
Well, I think it's really important for people buying software to know what they're buying. Now, it reminds me a little bit of mobile computing. I mean, if I go back just for a minute, 10 years ago, whenever it was when the iPhone became big, everybody built mobile apps on top of their enterprise apps. And they were kind of funky, and some of them worked, and some of them didn't work. And you could tell that there was a little skunk works that built this little mobile thing, but none of the functionality in the web app kind of worked. It was a subset. And little by little, vendors started to say, we're building the mobile app first. The web app is the second one we build. Let's focus on, because mobile was such a huge market. That's exactly the same analogy. The core of an enterprise talent intelligence platform is a vector database, a large language model, machine learning algorithms, huge amounts of data import from many, many, many sources, flexible workflow architecture on top of that, multiple machine learning models running together, those machine learning models talking to each other, one LLM or engine talking to another one and feeding information to a third one. That is not the architecture of an ERP. Yep. These systems were built on relational databases or object-oriented databases, but they're basically transactional systems. They don't have any of the features or capabilities of doing this. You can't run a machine learning algorithm on a traditional data structure with any level of efficiency at all. So the vendors that have taken existing, LMS, ATS, HRMS systems and added AI to them, that's great. But actually, a lot of what they're doing is commodity stuff. Like, let's add an LLM to generate a job description. Let's add an LLM to generate an email to a candidate. Let's add an LLM to clean up the performance management, document that you wrote. Everybody can do that. I mean, you can do that yourself with Galileo. By the way, our product does that. But that doesn't do talent intelligence. And so if the architecture of the system you're looking at isn't built on that, and by the way, the other thing that's really different, the talent intelligence vendors are data companies. Yep. They're basically big data companies. They spend, 70% of their time, maybe more, figuring out what data they need, getting it, bringing it into the system, running the models against it. Your data as a client is a teeny, teeny, tiny amount of that. Your data is sitting in a pool of a gigantic, bigger set of data to make your data more and more and more valuable. In a traditional ERP, your data is it. That's all you have. So not only is the technology architecture different, but the business behind it is different, what the vendors are doing. That's why it's so disruptive. I think these new vendors are, somewhat could replace at some point, or certainly definitely disrupt some of the talent features of the core HR systems.
So Josh, we've been talking a lot and framing the entire story from post-industrial to talent intelligence, and I call that 1.0, and then enterprise talent intelligence. You've pulled all this together in a white paper. Can you give us a little bit of a preview of what's going on with the white paper?
So the white paper was my attempt at sort of giving everybody a tiny history lesson on where this all started, how talent management, which we used to call it, has evolved into talent intelligence, a little bit of the business justification, and then all sorts of examples of different companies that have done this. I think the white paper will be a good education tool for people, but I think it will also encourage you to take this seriously. This isn't sort of an interesting idea that you might consider sometime in the future. This is going to be a competitive weapon because the companies that use these kinds of technologies are going to they're going to source people, they're going to understand things about their skills, they're going to identify opportunities that the other companies are not even going to see coming. So it should help you with that business justification.
Hey Josh, it's been wonderful having a conversation on talent intelligence and this evolution to enterprise talent intelligence. I'm looking forward to the topic here for the rest of 2024.
Thank you, Bill.